welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my July wrap up. I'm a little bit late because I spent last week in the wilds of Wales on a scout camp. I'm a scout leader. We were in this lovely little valley. There was a steam train running right by it and a reservoir, and it was beautiful, and it was actually quite nice to be away from the internet for a while. But now I'm back. I did do some reading while I was on camp. First book that I read in July was Holding Up the Universe by Jennifer Niven. This is a YA romance contemporary book. It's about a girl called Libby, who she was previously known as America's fattest teen, and she's since recovered quite a bit, but she's still quite large, but she feels ready to go back to high school, and she's really nervous about it, but she's going to do it anyway, and it's great. And also a boy called Jack, who goes to that school, who has, I can't say the name of it, but face blindness. He can't recognise people's faces, which means he gets in a lot of difficult situations where he doesn't actually know who he's talking to. And it was really interesting actually for me, because I'm really interested in memory and memory loss, things like that, and I've never actually read a perspective where somebody who has this condition is actually trying to hide it and or pretend to live a normal life. So nobody around him knows about it. But when he meets Libby, there's an incident, and she ends up being the first person he actually tells about this. And really, I actually found the best part of this book was seeing their friendship develop before their romance. Their romance to me wasn't particularly convincing, and it's really just nice to see like a good friendship blossom, and yeah, it was just a fun read, I think. Very enjoyable, quite a quick read. I give 4 stars. The next book that I read was Requite by Malaika Kegode. I was really excited to get this book. Malaika is actually an old school friend of mine. I haven't seen her for a few years now, but I remember when she was first getting into the performance poetry side of things, and going to local gigs, and now she's really quite a big name in Bristol area, and she does things with like the Edinburgh Fringe, and her performance poetry is amazing. But it was really actually cool to read these. There's some really beautiful illustrations as well, and a lot of the poems are actually about people that I know or knew back when we were at school, and it's very strange to read poems and actually know who the people are, but it was really lovely. It's published by Burning Eye Books. I gave this 5 stars. I'm also probably quite biased, but I really recommend this to anybody looking for some new poetry. It's quite accessible. Malaika's style is quite conversational, but I also really do recommend you look up her performance poetry as well. The third book that I read in July was The Blood Miracles by McInerney. This is it's kind of like a sequel to The Glorious Heresies, which was a book I read I think last month or the month before. One of the things that I really loved about The Glorious Heresies was that it really felt like an in-depth character study. This book takes a different turn. It focuses on one of those characters from The Glorious Heresies, Ryan, and his developing relationship with his girlfriend. He's half Italian. His boss wants to use those links to create a new drugs channel into Cork, and that doesn't go very well. This book was a lot more plot driven than The Glorious Heresies, and I think that in some ways made it stronger, but also made it weaker in other areas. So The Glorious Heresies, the plot was just more about the links and the kind of consequences of one action, and it was a lot more about characters, whereas this one has got a much stronger plot. There's a lot more of a drive. I felt like I was reading to know what happens rather than just to get to know the characters. But I think losing those other points of view, where instead we just focused on Ryan, actually distracted from what I loved about The Glorious Heresies, the character studies. And I found that some of these characters, especially like Ryan's dad, the big drug boss, I forgot his name, Jimmy something, those people didn't feel as very fleshed out. They just felt like shallow background characters, and I think if I'd read this book before I'd read The Glorious Heresies, I think you can well do that, but I think some of those characters, like Ryan's dad, would have really just felt like, why are they there? They're a waste of space. I gave Glorious Heresies 4 stars, and I also gave this 4 stars, but I think they both lose that 1 star for very different reasons. So this was still really enjoyable for me. I actually liked that the pacing was a bit quicker, but I really do kind of wish that she had kept that multiple point of view storytelling. Fourth book that I read in July was The 5 Children on the Western Front by Kate Saunders. This is a sort of sequel to E. Nesbit's 5 Children and It. It's historical fiction, and it takes the 5 children from the original book, adds one more, and looks at their futures. There's an interesting note in the back here where Kate Saunders actually goes into her reasonings behind that, and her realisation that 2 of these children would have been the right age to go to war. It's set during the First World War, and it starts just when the First World War starts and the Samead appears. And the Samead is a sand fairy from ancient times, and he's the It from the original book, 5 Children and It. This time his magic is not working properly, so he can only do wishes that somehow teach him lessons. And I think the Samead for me was, I didn't like him in the original book, and I really didn't like him either in this book, so that was a big negative for me. I just thought, what's the point of him? He's like, and why do the kids even like him? He's literally like so grumpy and so rude and just so ungrateful. And I know part of the book is actually about teaching him those lessons, but by the end I didn't actually feel like he had learned anything. He loved the children, so of course he's going to be doing something that helps them in some way. But I don't think he actually learned the lessons that he was supposed to learn. But what was really good about this book was the period detail was very, very good. The dialogue, I think one of the things I find a lot in children's books set during this time is the dialogue still feels very modern, whereas this actually felt like Kate Saunders had researched how people talked at the time, the kind of language and slang was very, very accurate, I think. So yeah, this one was a bit of a flop for me. This one was 3 stars from me, a bit disappointing. Yeah. The 5th book that I read this month was Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. Lots of people have been talking about this all over BookTube. I've seen loads and loads of reviews. It's literally been in bookshops right on the front display for a long time now. Actually, my housemate's copy, she brought it in, she read it, and she really, really enjoyed it, so I thought, oh, I'd pick it up too. To me, this collection didn't really live up to my expectations. I was expecting to like it a lot more than I did. I felt like a lot of the poems were actually really like anecdotes or interestingly poignant sentences or something that had been broken down into lines. They didn't really have any substance to them around that. So a lot of the emotion for this, I think, is quite self-inserting. It's quite wrapped up in what the individual person reading it feels, which is great in a lot of poems and a lot of collections, I think. But for me, this just felt a bit lazy almost. There are a lot of poems in here, and some of them are so short, like this one. And I really think that she could have combined some of them, and she could have really done something a bit more with it, because for me it was just too brief, too plodding, and she's very good at creating one-liners that have real power behind them, but for me I didn't think that was poetry. There needed to be something more to it. So there are a few things I really did enjoy in here, but for the most part I read it very, very quickly, and a lot of them I just thought were a little bit pretentious, really. So this one got 3 stars as well from me. So the next book that I read in July was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This is a YA book. It's very, very popular and for very good reason. It's about a girl called Star who one night after a party, her and her friend are pulled over by a police officer, and her friend ends up dead. And this is a story we've seen all over the news and often not in the news as well. And it was very, 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 very emotional for a lot of different reasons. It's very powerfully written, but that incident is not the only thing. This book has so much substance around it as well, to do with the trial and family and gang culture and what it's like to grow up somewhere that you're almost ashamed of but love at the same time, and having to hide half of who you are from school friends who just don't understand. There's a lot in here about friendships, family. Family was one of the best things I thought about this book. I've never seen a family written so well as I have in here. It's not just your usual nuclear family, it's very complex. You've got half siblings and step parents, and every single person in her family felt like a real person. The dialogue was incredibly well written. There are a lot of big themes in here about justice, police brutality, gun crime, gang culture, and complex and broken families, and the strength of communities. And this book spoke to me on so many levels. I think it's a book that everyone should read. The only negatives in this book for me were I thought that some of the pop culture references were a little bit, I think they could be quite dated in a few years' time, and I really wanted this book to be a bit more timeless, or have that timeless feel, because it's a very important book. There's no denying that. But I think a book that's dated is quite easily dismissed, and I really don't want that to happen to this book. The only other thing was John Green. Why is John Green on the cover of this book? Why does his opinion matter? Why? Of all the people that you could have picked to go on this cover, John Green is the last one I would have thought of. John Green, why? I get that he's popular, and I get that he's like the, I don't know, father of YA, but it just feels like this book had so much to say, and that there are better people to have quotes of on the front of a book like this. And John Green's one word is not, that's not it. I think, yeah, get rid of John Green, put somebody actually relevant on there, maybe. Yeah, I give this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Last book that I read in July was one I actually took with me on my camping trip. So it's a little bit bad now, but How Saints Die by Carmen Marcus. This book I think I heard about on Jane Campbell's channel, and her description of it basically made me buy it very quickly, because it sounded like exactly my kind of book. And this book is about a little girl called Ellie who lives with her fisherman father in a Yorkshire coastal town, and her mother has been taken away, but she doesn't really understand why. Her father tells her stories. Her father tells her that he fished her out of the sea and took her from the net, and she fully believes these things. So her world is quite confusing for her. There's quite a lot of clashes with the real world and her fantasy world, and how those things blend or don't always blend. So she struggles at school, but one day a new boy appears, Robin, who she quickly renames Fletch, and they start up a really interesting friendship that is a central line through this novel, I think. Almost all the adults around her have names that are from fairy tales or stories about magic, and specifically stories about children who are wrapped up in some kind of magical world. So Ellie's father is called Peter, their neighbour is called Alice, and there's lots of little things like that dripped in, and lots of references to all kinds of other books and fairy tales. The positives are that it was really beautifully written. Carmen Marcus really has a way with words. Everything is very sensual and visual and auditory as well. So I could really feel the cold of the sea and the wind and the noises. It's very startling imagery, and I really love that kind of writing. Dialogue was formatted a little bit unusually, but everything was spaced out, and there was lots of these spaces, and I felt that in itself was quite interesting to look at in terms of analysis, because I think there's so much here that slips between the lines. There's so many layers of lots of things going on and lots of references, and the detail is incredible, I think. Carmen Marcus is definitely somebody to watch out for, and I would not be surprised if she also writes poetry. The negatives were that I think from about the 2/3 of the way through and the ending, it got a little bit messy, and I think lost control a bit, and that might be completely deliberate, but for me it just lost me a bit. I wasn't sure what the point was, especially of an event that happens very close to the end, but despite that it was still really enjoyable. It's definitely one I think for cold winter days. It was a bit weird to read it in summer, but I was on a very, very rainy campsite and I was very cold for a lot of time, so it worked out anyway. So this one I gave 4 stars. Camera died again. That was my reading wrap up for July. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, if you liked them, if you didn't like them. I really love having those conversations with you. So yeah, I'll see you in my next video. Oh, it's got wonky again. Happy reading, guys. Bye. Stop going wonky. Lisa McInerney. More of a plot there. I think, oh, it's going wonky again. Stay there, come on. 1 more minute. Look, what am I doing with my hands? Oh, I can't do talking. Hello?